Welcome to another episode of the Life of Elvis podcast. I'm your host, Elvis, as always. And today with me is Christina Powers, who's an Ayurveda practitioner. So it's going to be a quite interesting discussion about health, alternative medicine. And before we start, from our sponsor, Terra Vitality, whether you want some good organic t-shirts designed by some of our guests that we had on my podcast, or whether you want to achieve greater freedom and health and prosperity, then check it out. The link is in the description. And we also work together with Project Child Save. So if you want to actually make a difference in someone's life, you can go again into the description. There's a link. You can donate to them. All of the donations go directly to missions that rescue kids from being trafficked. So no matter how much you can spare, it helps a lot. So thank you very much for that. And now let's get into the podcast. So, Christina, I'm really glad to have you on.
Thank you. And beautiful. That's wonderful. I wasn't really totally aware of all your sponsorship. And so that's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. Trying to do something good in the world, Okay, so tell us a bit about yourself. What do you do?
Sure. So I'm basically I'm an educator. When I work with my clients, I'm educating them how to transform their life into total health, well-being, vitality. And that requires looking at all of their whole life, like where they are. And I work with 5 sense therapies. So the eyes, the vision, what we see, how the eyes are working, making sure they're cleansed and nourished. The nasal passages, making sure those are cleansed and nourished. The ears, and then the touch, the skin, of course, and then what we eat. And I think that's where most people learn or come to Ayurveda as they hear about, the diet and the herbs. And that is a huge part of it. The interaction we have with the plant world, the intelligence of the medicines that they can provide are definitely key to the health and vitality. But as far as transforming and changing a life, it requires us to look at all the senses that we have and how we interact in our daily habits, and whether we push ourselves out of balance in what we see, hear, smell, touch, and taste, or whether we bring ourselves back into balance in that way.
That's good. And how did you get to that? What's your background?
Yeah. Well, I'm a career educator in California, in the States. So that means I was teaching English and literature in high schools, and I was ultimately an administrator in a high school. And it was never traditional. I always knew that I wasn't just teaching English and reading and writing, that I was teaching these young people how to be in the world and how to interact in the world and communicate in the world. And something else I brought to the table, I was a yoga and meditation teacher for over 25 years. And my students were asking me about it. Can you teach us? Can you show us how to do this? And so I would start doing, small after school programs. And then it just became, my administrators asked me to develop a whole after school program, a whole interactive PE program, so that students had an option, an alternative to the traditional physical education program. And so I continued to do that, and that was my reputation, and it followed me around. Administrators would want me to come because I did that. And then I eventually kind of branched off and started my own business and contracted with Los Angeles area schools to build yoga and meditation programs in middle schools and high schools. These are public and charter schools, traditional schools that didn't ever, have anything like that. And then eventually I came in contact with Ayurveda, just in that world of yoga and meditation, as I traveled around and went to a seminar by someone who I admired, and it just kind of planted the seed. And eventually, a few years ago in my career, I had an opportunity to. Well, I think COVID threw us into that opportunity. Everything kind of changed, and suddenly that was that transformative moment. And I said, I wanted this. Ayurveda makes more sense to me than anything. I don't want to just learn it for myself. I want to learn it and share it with other people. And at that time, a little bit more about me, I was diagnosed with diverticulitis, which is a disease I'd never heard of in large intestine. And I wasn't a particular candidate for that. So it was very mysterious of how I came in contact with that. And that was the moment for me that said, oh, I need to heal myself. Let me do that. And as I went through that whole process, that whole learning, I decided I want to teach other people. This is a different way of being. It has to be. We have to be different in how we approach our health and wellness, and that's kind of what the road opened up for me there.
Can imagine. I assume you're better now. You don't have diverticulitis anymore, or
No, I don't have. They're episodic,
uh-huh.
and so at the time when I was having them, I had probably six to eight episodes a year from the moment I was admitted to the emergency room. And then, just from learning and how I went through everything with Ayurveda, because I came in contact with, again, this person who I'd gone to his seminar in New Mexico years ago. And I said, oh, okay, let me look and see what he's doing. Let me read some things. And I just started doing, self-discovery with it and getting in contact with other practitioners and professionals. And the more I learned, the more I applied to my life, everything made sense. And so when I did my study at California College of Ayurveda, it's a 3 years academic and then a year internship, or 2.5 years academic, a year internship. You write a thesis just like you would in a master's program. And my thesis was on diverticulitis. So, coming from the academic side and the personal transformative side, I have patients who, those are some of the things I work with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we say patients in California, it's alternative medicine. If I'm working with somebody, depending on the country or the state, it might be a client, but
Yeah,
we're going to work in the same way, those legal terms.
yeah, no worries. Maybe what you were saying earlier, that you were doing PE for kids, they include yoga, meditation. When you mentioned that, I was like, man, that's a great idea, actually, because the
Yeah,
benefits of
yeah.
these things are great, and the generation that's out now, they are the first one whose lifespan is predicted to be shorter than of the previous generation for the first time. So that's something they could really
Yeah,
benefit from.
I've read that. Yeah, and these are the students who I first started teaching. They're in their 30s. They're in their early
Hmm.
30s now. Anywhere from 30 to 38. Those are kind of the kids that, came in that I started teaching. And I have there's so many things going on with that generation. They're just dealing with so many challenges that I don't feel like in our lifetime anybody else has had to deal with. The everything. And some of the students who I started teaching at that time, who were in my classes, they're still in contact with me. And that's the thing they remember about anything else in their class or whatever they did. It's those classes they took with me.
Yeah, can imagine it must stand
So
out a bit because
there's,
it's not very usual.
yeah, it's not. And it was equally give and take. I never expected that that's what I'd be
Mhm.
doing ever. It just organically evolved, and it came from them asking me, and it came from me actually doing it in the classroom because I needed to have some energy. I needed to have some
Mhm.
vitality and shift and change. It was kind of like a classroom management thing I did, and they wanted more.
Yeah. So how did it affect them when they were going to school? Benefits did you see?
Um, Yeah, well, we're talking about an inner city. We're talking about Los
Hmm.
Angeles, which is, not the best
To put it
place
mildly.
for going to school. Let me just say it that way
Yeah.
gently. It's not the best place for going to school. You're learning a lot not in the classroom. Um, and so it allowed some of these kids to have like a moment of relaxation where they weren't ridden with anxiety, tension. I mean, school is the hardest place. It really is, and seeing that from the inside. And so I knew that I was coming in contact with these kids probably more than their parents. And so whatever time they were in my classroom, and teaching English, well, that was kind of me secondary. It's like, yeah, that's what we're teaching and studying, but we're learning how to be human beings and, learning how to, relax and not have to feel like we're defensive. And so they all and then that related to their studies. They were able to go into other classes and feel like they'd gotten refreshed in my class, and we could go into their math class, their science class, and feel more focused. And that's what I heard repeatedly, and I heard repeatedly from the teachers who had them after me. They they go from one class to another. They say, "Oh, what are you doing in that class?" These kids come in and they're like totally different people.
Yeah. I wish I had something
So
like that when I
something
was
was
at
happening.
school.
Yeah.
I just remember all the existential dread that we had just before Slovakian language classes. I mean, totally opposite of what you were saying, being relaxed and everything. That would have helped a lot.
My I have two young adult children. They're both in their 20s,
Hmm.
and my son, he's 23, and he just is finishing massage therapy, physical massage therapy. He's a basketball player, and so he's kind of gone into that aspect of it. And he called me a few months ago because he was doing an internship, and he said, "Hey, mom." They were both in my yoga classes because I would go to different schools, and their
Hmm.
school was one of them that I would go and put my yoga program in. And he goes, "Can you teach me, show me some of those things? Because I have to present a yoga meditation thing." And I said, "Well, why are you asking me?" He goes, "Because you're a really good teacher and I like the way you teach." And he was probably the worst student. He would sit in the back of the class and try to do absolutely nothing. But, obviously he was absorbing something, I guess. And, it was proud mama moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And it also reminded me, I think it was this documentary. Can't remember the guy. It was the same guy who did Fahrenheit 9/11 documentary. He made this documentary. I
Mm,
think it was Sicko, about healthcare in the
yes.
states, and you know, there's might be different opinions about that movie. But there was one part when they showed a school for kids that, well, had a really difficult behavior, and at one point they switched around the diets. So what they had in the cafeterias, they, instead of pizzas and junk food, stuff like that, they started putting whole foods over there. And the teacher said that they could see a big difference in their behavior.
Mm,
You wouldn't even tell that there was something. It was just like normal school, if not better. After that, so things
yeah.
like these, good diet, some meditation, yoga, it makes a big difference.
Oh, it's all the
Yeah.
difference. And, it's the same thing when I work with my adult clients. You know, uh, the thing that has left the social culture is how we eat. In Ayurveda, there are three pillars that we look at to health and vitality that is showing up as your wellness, and that's sleep, eating, and then your relationships
Mhm.
and how you have energy for the relationships. And if you're not having proper sleep or you have disrupted sleep, you have improper, let's say not even the foods, it's how you're eating, when you're eating. Those things are going to disturb your energy and vitality, and therefore you aren't going to be able to have vital relationships and build them. And that's the important essence of our health. And think about it, when you're eating, you're asking this food, whatever it is, to become part of your every single cell in your body
Mhm.
and having this consciousness with it. In Ayurveda, we say, it's not so much what you eat, but how you eat. And yes, what you eat, hugely vital because, but being present with this food, not being distracted, paying attention to how it smells, how it tastes, how it feels in your body. That's your digestive system starting.
Mhm.
And then we get to the layer of, okay, what is it that you're taking in? Whatever you're taking in, it's either going to become part of your cells or it's going to become toxic in your body. And we think that everything comes out in waste. Like you eat toxic, oh, let me just cleanse it out. And that's really not how the body works. Those toxins, they stay in the body. And that's what causes the mental fog. I can't think. I have, maybe I have mood swings or maybe my body hurts. I don't have enough energy. It's because of these toxins that sit in the body from what we're
Yeah.
eating and how we're
Yeah,
eating.
especially if it's day in, day out, 3 times a day or more.
Yeah. And even the most vital food, let's say, the most farm to table, fresh, organic, super food, if you have a way of approaching eating, like you're not paying attention to eating it, it's becoming toxic because the whole mechanism in the body, it has to be the parasympathetic nervous system has to turn on, which is the rest and digest. And if it's the sympathetic nervous system where you're driving,
Mm.
you're talking and walking, you're moving quickly to one thing or the other, you're on your social media or you're working at your computer as you're eating, there is no digestion happening, and whatever super energetic smoothie you're drinking is becoming toxic. And that's the truth of it. And people don't always know that because they think, well, how come that's the category I was in when I had diverticulitis. I'm, drinking. I knew what foods to eat and not to eat. I
Hmm.
was vegetarian. I was probably vegan at that time. I was smoothies, greens, cleansing, all of that stuff. I'm like, how in the world could I get diverticulitis? When I found out what it was, I'm like, that makes no sense to me. But then what made further sense to me is everything I was eating was pushing me off balance. And I was, been, high stress job, constantly moving, constantly on the go. Everything I was eating was becoming toxic in my body.
Hmm. Yeah, and then another layer to it is it also it's your beliefs that make a difference as well. I remember I got his name on tip of my tongue, but I don't know. Never mind. Famous guy, but he was saying that there was some study where they gave some high cholesterol food to a group of people, and depending, well, two groups of people, and depending on what kind of belief they had on whether they thought it was healthy or not, or whether they knew it was healthy or not, made a difference in their cholesterol levels, even though they had the same food.
Yeah, yeah, that's the mind, and that's the other. Like I said at the beginning when you and I was talking, there's a trifecta in Ayurveda.
Hmm.
So it's Ayurveda, the food, the bisense therapies, the herbs, yoga, and meditation. It's where the mind is because the mind is controlling everything. And then we come back with the bigger picture and we call it Vedic astrology or Yotish astrology. It's astrology looking at the alignment and how that is affecting what's going on in this human body. But the mindset is critical. That's why I was mentioning it's more important how our mindset is when we're eating than even actually what we're eating.
Hmm.
Meditation changes everything. You go inside, you can begin, sensing the organs, you can begin sensing what's happening in the body, listening to the body, because in Ayurveda, that's what I also teach. What we teach is it's called rupa. Rupa is a Sanskrit term. It means the signs. So when your mind is tuned into the signs that your body, the messages your body is giving you through the eyes, the ears, the nose, the inside, you can feel these things and you know the signs, and all of a sudden you understand, oh, this is what's going out of balance. I need to change this. It's like a polarity thing. We have 10 pairs of opposites qualities that we look at. Is it too hot, cold, soft, hard? um, what else? Too heavy, too light? Those are just some beginning examples. Too rough, too smooth. And within those balances, we're balancing out what the imbalance is. And when you are tuned in meditatively, you can pay attention to those signs. If you're not paying attention to those signs, then you go into the next stage, which is purva-rupa, and you're getting into the symptoms. When you eventually go to a doctor and they eventually diagnose, and so then it's moved into this manifestation relocation phase where beginning it started out somewhere, maybe it was the ear, the nose, the eye, maybe it was somewhere on the skin, and you weren't paying attention to whatever the message your body was saying. Hey, you're doing too much of this or you're not doing enough of this. Then you move into the disease.
Hmm. Now, before we move a bit more forwards, can you tell to our listeners what Ayurveda is? Just a quick, like, where it comes from and what's the difference between Ayurvedic medicine and the medicine that we have over here in the West right now?
Okay, let me quickly pare it down. So when we think about Ayurveda, it's you break the words down. It's the science of life, right? Ayurveda is life, the science of life, the science of this human body. And that's the beginning stage of what turned me on, because I'm very interested in science and understanding the world in that way. And so, as I said, when I started studying it, it made sense to, it's almost like an operating manual for the human body. And so the ancient texts, the classic texts that we study, as far that we can date them, goes back 4,500 years ago to the Vedic texts. And at that time, the tradition was handed down by the sages, the Vedas, and they were, and at that point, let's say 4,500, 5,000 years ago, these were already ancient texts. It wasn't something that just
Hmm.
suddenly came on the scene 5,000 years ago,
That's when someone
but
wrote
it
it
was
down.
actually right. So, and it was passed down from the sages. They were, a sage was in the, or they called them Vaidyas. They're like, we say Ayurvedic doctor, the Vaidyas, and that's Sanskrit. So it's coming down from them, and they would have, followers, and they would students, and they would train them and teach them in the communities, and in those small communities. And this is coming from the East, primarily from India, and that's where they would learn it. And then it was handed down, and they finally started writing it down 4,500 years ago. And so the Karaka Samhita, that's the text that I'm referring to. There's three major texts, three minor texts, and they kind of all come from each other. But the Karaka Samhita is kind of the one that everybody refers to as the most ancient and classic text. And, I had to study, those are the ones I studied. When I said I'm talking about diverticulitis, I also had to refer to all these classic texts and go in there and combine with the medical research and studies we were doing now. And I had to overlay them. So even looking in those ancient texts, and I look at the signs and the symptoms, I can identify what they were calling diverticulitis. We can identify it that far back. Um, and it was, the medicines were herbal medicines, which is where the lineage of Western medicines come from. They come from the herbs. So in Western medicine will pull out a particular part of the herb, they'll reformulate it in synthetic form. And so they're looking at what the ancient texts said these plants did. Now, Ayurveda looks at the whole plant. And that's where the intelligence, that's where the difference is. So let's say, plants like uh, Tulsi or ashwagandha or St. John's wort. They'll pull in Western medicine a lot of, they'll pull out aspects of those plants and they'll reformulate it and they'll put it into a formula. They can put it into a pharmaceutical formula. Ayurveda will just look at that entire one, because it's not just looking at where it goes in the body, it's looking at restructuring and rejuvenating the cell tissue, not just blocking the pain, not just creating a situation where there's alleviation of the symptom, but that whole energetic part of the plant rejuvenates the tissues. That's the underlying intelligence and science of Ayurveda. It's rejuvenating tissues. Everything is a
Hmm.
rejuvenative process. And I mean, I look at myself like 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, even when I was suffering from diverticulitis, I go, that was me. There's a huge difference, physiologically, like in age and everything, in the way I looked. So it's working with the regenerative process of the whole human body.
Yeah, that's a big difference from Western medicine, because, like you said, usually, like most of the compounds that we use in Western medicine, they come from the Amazon rainforest. Someone discovered it there, isolated, found a way how to make it synthetically, patented it. That's an important thing, so they can make money out of it. And then using just that specific compound to target one specific thing within the body. Whereas, like you're saying, Ayurveda looks at the whole body, making sure that the entire system works in harmony, right?
It does, because it's not just, the lungs doing their job. You might be surprised, whoa, we're showing something showing up on the ankle on the skin that is related to the lungs. And that sign over there is, having something to do with the lungs. And the lungs are going to be the ultimate system that's going to, break down in that particular case. But if we looked at the sign ahead of time and we started, supporting the body tissues and the way they work, because it's all, we have this circulatory system, and that's how a disease is manifested and relocated, is we have this amazing circulatory system, that's, going throughout the entire body, and things will move and relocate, and it will relocate in the tissues of our body where we have the most weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, from life experience and trauma. Whatever part of the body has suffered some weakness, that's where that disease is going to take. And they're, what is that word? They're very opportunistic.
Right. Yeah. And like you were saying earlier, instead of taking just a specific compound one of them, came to my mind, for example, when you look at turmeric and the active compound, curcumin. Yeah.
Curcumin, yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you just take curcumin on your own, it's not as effective as when you take the whole plant, but also if you combine it with black pepper, piperin, or piperin, I don't know what it's called exactly, but it makes it way more effective that way, rather than just isolating the one specific compound out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then even further, let's say I was designing a formula, and the things, when you're talking about black pepper and turmeric, one of the first things is inflammation and channel clearing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the turmeric, for example, would be working on anti-inflammatory and analgesic. So it's a pain reliever as well. And the pepper clears the channel. So if there's any blocked channels in there, the pepper clears the channel and helps it move deeper in there. And then we add something like, let's say, fennel. The basic formula, I add something like fennel. Fennel is what we call a carrier. And so it will take all of that into the deeper tissue. So if, like, you're working with the heart, you're working with the lungs, you're working with the liver, it's what we call the carrier. Carriers are all the way deeper into the tissues.
Yeah. And also, because as I said, when we were talking before we started this podcast, I read about Ayurveda at least 10 years ago, if not more. Because at that point in my life, I was starting to, I didn't have proper access to internet every day like I have now. So I was ordering lots of books, and through martial arts, I got into philosophy and Qigong, then into healthy diets, and then also Ayurveda. So it was interesting what it's about, and those two, it was like 2-part book. That really got me into a better path in terms of diet and everything, because it's hard to argue with 5,000 years minimum of experience rather than just something that someone comes up kind of over the past 10 years. So I totally lost my track. I was trying to say with it. Oh yeah, there was one interesting thing that there's also a big difference between Ayurvedic medicine and Western allopathic medicine, is that in Ayurveda, as mentioned in the book that I read, it is not acceptable for any kind of medicine to have side effects. Unlike in Western medicine, you get like a long list of stuff that can happen. It's sometimes even worse than stuff that there's an illness you're trying to treat.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you don't really see it. And if there's a side effect, let's say, I design a formula for a client who we're working with, sleep, and there's some sort of side effect that's showing up. I will tailor the formula I will either increase the dosage or change, the players, because there's, it's a specific player. Like I said, there's a chief, we call it a support, we call it an assist. Sometimes we have antagonists and we have carriers. We have all kinds of things that we put in there. It's, it's a very mathematical calculated formula. And we want somebody who is being first and foremost relieved of pain and suffering, and that's what allopathic Western medicine, that's their specialty. They're going to relieve you of pain and suffering immediately. So there is a place to work together. But Ayurvedic, what we're interested in is, like I said, restoring and rejuvenating that tissue, that body, that human organism. And so when you're looking at what kind of side effects are happening, first, is this a side effect that seems a little uncomfortable because there's been a change in life and suddenly your body is changing and transforming? That's something to pay attention to versus, is this something they're really continuing to pain and suffer or causing more pain and suffering? And do we need to adjust the formula? So I'm seeing a client every week in the beginning stages for sure. 3 to 6 months minimally, seeing them every week to see what happens in their life. How is this medicine that they're working? And we're not going to see the effects of the medicine. We're going to need to wait for 14 days is when we begin to see the effects. And a lot of times in allopathic medicine, that's, they're giving it to you and they say, come back in a month, come back in 3 months, tell me, what's happening. You really have to pay attention to how that medicine is affecting their life in those first, few months.
Even this is just such a massive difference. I remember when I was going to school, my biology teacher, a smart guy, and he was saying many times you go to a doctor over here and he just looks at you from 5 meters away, like, yeah, antibiotics, instead of actually figuring out like what's wrong with you, exactly what kind of strain of bacteria or virus you need to be trying to fight here. But it's just like, just there you go. And yeah, it's just such a big difference. Or even,
Yeah,
yeah, that's what I would say.
no.
Same with SSRIs. Many people here in the West, especially a few decades ago, they were saying, "Oh yeah, you're depressed. You just got some kind of imbalance in your brain," but no one would actually bother measuring it. But that's the case, or what kind of imbalance is there? How much?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another huge distinction in Ayurveda is, so when I initially see a client, I see them for 90 minutes to 2 hours initially. That's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
what we're doing here. I'm listening to them. I'm learning about them. I'm learning, there's something in their life that has pushed the imbalance. It's not the food they've eaten. It's not the things they've had to drink, but there's something in their life that has pushed this to them in that imbalance. And then the five senses have, pushed that even further. And so I'm listening to that. And so let's say someone has insomnia or sleep. It's not just one, there's not one herb, there's many, and there's many reasons what have caused that. Are they having trouble going to sleep? Are they having trouble staying asleep? Are they getting up and what is their mind doing? That's really critical.
Mm-hmm.
Are they getting up and their mind is, planning, thinking? Are they thinking about something that happened in the day? Or is anger coming up? Are they feeling anxiety about something that's going to happen in the future? Are they worried? Are they fearful? Or is it, sometimes the case is they can't even wake up. Those are all completely different scenarios and completely different types of herbal medications and lifestyle changes that would need to happen. I mean, it's huge. Or is their body moving? Sometimes it's the body, the somatic, the body and the mind are kind of not connecting, and the body is moving all over the place, stimulating the mind. It's just many, many things at play, not just, take a sleep aid and have a good night's sleep and get up and go to work.
Yeah, that's true. And to be fair, like if I went to a Western doctor, I would be talking to him for like 90 minutes or 2 hours. I'll be really afraid that there's something seriously wrong with me because most of the visits that I had to the doctors, the vast majority of them were like way shorter than that.
Yeah, I remember, like, I was sharing with you, my upbringing was a little bit different. My
Hmm.
grandmother was, organic and yoga and
That's
meditation
cool.
and, crystals, energy, and all that kind of stuff. She had that. language, and it was all around me, and I was listening to her a lot. So I always questioned Western medicine as I grew
Mhm.
up and interacted with it. I remember, first time in college, I was in my college health clinic, and I said, "Well, why is this happening? Why am I getting this?" And the doctor said, "I don't know." I don't know. I don't care. If we start talking about it, it's going to be, who cares about why you have it? You have it. Here, take this medicine, be done with it. And I'm like, I said to myself, and I said, well, there's got to be something in my lifestyle that is causing me to have this condition. I want to change it because I don't want to keep having this
Yeah.
condition. They didn't want to hear that. They did not want to have that conversation. And that is, another difference. And again, I'm not bashing allopathic medicine. I said,
There's a place for it,
there is
obviously. Yeah.
definitely a place where you are in a crash and an emergency situation. You want to have
Mhm.
that allopathic doctor going there and doing what they do. But in the case where you're transforming and rejuvenating and revitalizing your life, Ayurveda is where the fit is,
Yeah.
because we want to know what in your life has pushed you to the point of this imbalance, this symptom, this condition, this disease that's showing up, that's creating unhappiness, loss of health and vitality, low energy. What is causing this?
Mhm.
Because whatever you're doing is going to keep it perpetuating.
Yeah. And the big problem with Western medicine, like I said, there's a place for it. Obviously, when there's something really wrong with you, then that's a that's a that's what you want basically. But to prevent diseases or to have a healthy lifestyle, then all the chemical stuff that big pharma pours out is not good for you. And the big problem is that it's a huge business. If you,
It is a huge
yeah,
business, and it feeds on fear.
yeah,
People feel like they can't function without it. And I have the majority of my clients are on pharmaceuticals, and when they come to
mhm,
me, they want to be off. And so there's a way to do it. You don't just Most of people it's not very healthy just to go cold turkey and go off.
obviously,
So I work with them. I work with within the I look at their blood charts. I look at all of their tests, all of that, and I look at what their doctor is doing, and work in concert with them to, we call it titrating, bringing the meds down, bringing the herbal medicines up, because herbal medicines are not lifetime. They are meant for a season, they're meant for a time, they're meant for what's happening right now. So it's not meant to be on for years, well, that's undetermined. It depends on, what the condition is, what the length of time is, and how the body is recovering, and how the person is, moving and shifting the things in their life that have caused that imbalance in the first place. But it's meant, like I said, to repair, restore, rejuvenate the tissues, not to be this homeostasis place that you accept that you're on medication for the rest of your
yeah.
life.
That's what I meant with business. Because if you treat someone
Yeah.
and within a few weeks, months, or maybe even a few years, they're sorted out with plants which obviously are not patented or anything like that. And that's why with
Yeah.
with certain herbs and stuff like that, there's no interest from big pharma because they cannot patent it, can't make as much money from it. Now, if you put I've heard of so many people who, for example, with high blood pressure medicine, they're like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna be on it for the rest of my life. It's like, and it's high blood pressure is not even that hard to treat. There's so many things you can do, including healthy lifestyle. It just makes a huge difference. So having
Yeah. There's a huge plant source that treats it.
Yes. So having someone basically become addicted to whatever big pharma puts out, it's a great business model for them. So they're not really interested in curing actually someone. It's just managing disease rather than actually curing it. And
Yeah.
then on top of it,
Yeah.
all these things that big pharma did in the past where they put out products that weren't saved, where they messed around with the science. On paper it looked like, yeah, it's dynamite, it works, but then it killed I don't know how many thousand people, had to be taken um, off the market. I mean, Pfizer, for example, they had to pay billions of dollars just in fines for these kinds of
Mm.
things. So there's definitely a lot wrong with this kind of system that we have.
Agreed.
Yeah. But it's good that, again, Ayurveda is something that you go 100 years or even just decades back and it wasn't heard about. Just like the stuff that I read when I was, in my early 20s, Qigong and all that stuff. You go a bit back in the past and no one knew about it. But just now, as we need it the most, all this came out and now we can all benefit from it.
Yeah, and I'm, like I said, during that, that COVID time, for me that was a flowering. I was able to learn this skill, and I'm coming out and I'm finding, I'm able to serve more and more people because they're asking for it, and they're asking for it, people traditionally, who you would not think would want to know about it. And so I have a lot of clients who really, they've just kind of heard about it. They really don't know that much about it. And again, that's my skill and my gift in my former career as a teacher. It's lent itself into what I'm doing here, because I never think I'm treating a patient. I'm educating a human
Mm-hmm.
being.
It's a,
And and I'm learning just as much from their body, from their mind, from their whole experience, and it's like this interactive experience, as in the teaching learning process.
yeah, and that's so much more valuable. I've noticed it also with my personal training. A few years ago, for example, when I was still in the UK, I would train people, do sessions with them, but I could see that the best people get the best results when they actually learn that stuff. Where it's not just like coming for a session and do the job and then just you know don't really know what they're doing there. So that's why I'm putting into Terra Vitality now, where rather than just holding someone's hand and making sure they go get through a workout, it's better teaching them how
Mm.
so they have the knowledge themselves, because that's what helped me as well. I never had a personal trainer. I never had someone teaching me about nutrition, although I did some courses and stuff like that. But no one like one-on-one pushing me to do something. Same with music and all the rest and all of the stuff that I do. I just taught myself, and that's why I was able to get much better results. Whether it's when it comes to diet, like I said, those books about Ayurveda were quite crucial because when I was in my teens, well, even as a kid, I used to be ill quite a lot. You know, a few times a year, I would have some kind of a cold, flu. Sometimes it was worse. And then when I was 17, during summer, nonetheless, just when we were off school, so annoying. I got pneumonia. I was pretty ill. I
Mm.
didn't want to go to doctors, and turns out it was pneumonia. But I survived. And that's only at that point the doctors were like, well, let's have a look at there's something wrong with your immune system. And they did find out there was something wrong with it. So I remember taking some medicine they gave me for it, to sort out my immune system. And that's why I was already training martial arts at that point. And I started looking more into nutrition. So I was making slowly changes. Sometimes it was just something I read from a magazine that my mom had, something like that. But once I started learning about Qigong and Ayurveda, that's when I went all out. And pretty much since then, even though I had flus and colds and stuff like that, it was never it never got. Hold on. The last time I was a doctor with some kind of illness, it was like 2010 or 2011, something like that. One of those is maybe 2012. On that time. Since then, even if I had some kind of flu, I just you know powered through it basically, and just natural remedies, and I'm way better off than I was before. And again, like when I was in my teens, they would always prescribe antibiotics and stuff like that. And I think that was one of the things that, because we know it attacks also bacteria which is not supposed to in your microbiome. So that probably caused the issue with my immune system.
Yeah. So when you say there's an issue with your immune system, yes, what's happening is suppressing your immune
Mm.
system. And illness is also a natural form of
Yeah.
cleansing. So people, the medicine, allopathic industry, the big pharma has educated us to be fearful of illness. This body is designed. It has a whole defense system. It has a very, very sophisticated defense system. It's got backup upon backup upon backup. And if we let this body do what it's engineered and designed to do, we come in contact with pathogens all the time,
Mhm.
all the time. We're breathing them, they're in us all the time. And so it's how the body can work with it. And we take in a certain amount of things that are toxic. The natural illness system is getting rid of those toxins. It's when we have the sustained and chronic, then there's
Mhm.
something in the lifestyle that we are just perpetuating. And one of the things Ayurveda looks at, we look at the design of the human body. There's certain tendencies, and just looking at you, what you were saying, I was not surprised that you were having the lung, the
Mm.
pneumonia, the flus, and the colds, and that kind of a chronic thing. That usually is where it kind of manifests right here, is in the lungs and in the heart, and there's this whole lymph system. And so, I would say, yep, that sounds very much like what I would have, just known that might manifest in you.
Yeah, exactly. And now you just mentioned the,
Because we're trying to get you back to what your health is, what your vitality and health is. That's what I'm saying. It's we look at all kinds of different body structures,
yeah,
but it's like there's certain tendencies that a particular type of body has, and it's it difference. And looking at every single part of it is part of that physical examination, saying, yeah, it's highly likely that there might be something going on with the lungs and mucus and all of that stuff.
yeah, exactly. People are different to some extent, and if you, like when I was younger, whenever you're ill, you take some kind of medicine, antibiotics and stuff like that, your immune system is going to get a bit lazy because I know if I get ill, I'm going to get something for it, so I don't have to work as hard. Right, that's the one thing, and another thing is mentioned COVID at least twice now. It was the most insane thing when during that time, natural immunity has become a conspiracy theory, and during that time, that's so ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Very, very, a huge amount of learning about the body. And I think that's where people got hungry. People started getting hungry to learn about how their body's working and not just accept what they're being fed by
At
the
least a
media.
certain percentage of people. Yeah,
Yeah. 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 And it is true. I mean, I am coming in contact with, people who are hungry to want to learn and change and
hmm,
transform. But then there are also the people who don't want to learn and don't want to change and don't want to
yeah,
transform.
and just rely
That
on big
there's
pharma.
this I feel a dichotomy in that.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
And I know that those are the people I'm not going to be able to serve. I don't try to change them if it's not my job to try to change anybody in that mindset. If they're in the mindset where they want to change, want to transform, want to learn, I'm here and ready.
Exactly. There's only that much you can do for certain people. You can't push them to. You know.
Yeah, I think you can show
Yeah, of
them.
course you can show, but
I
at the end of the day, it's
you
up to
can
them.
show them by your life and the way you interact and the way you're being, because eventually they say, "Hey, how come what's going on different with you than with me?" And you say, "Oh, this is what I do." And then you can interest them in that way, which I'm not about preaching or proselytizing to tell anybody to be anyway.
Yeah, lead by example. That's the best way, always. So you mentioned the three pillars of Ayurveda. Can we go through
Mm,
each one of them a bit? Explain a little bit.
sure. Yeah. So ultimately, like I said, when I'm meeting a client and every time we're talking each week, checking in, I'm looking at what they're eating, how they're eating, the times of day they're eating. That we talk about what are the physicians the differences. And as I said in the beginning, that's important because everything you take in is you're asking it to be a part of your body. And so, how are you doing that? What way is that manifesting? Second is the sleep pattern, because this is our our whole human system is engineered to rejuvenate every single day. And if that's disrupted, that's not happening. So if, let's say, the sleep pattern happens where there's no sleep happening between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., that's when the liver system, the gallbladder, the pancreas, that begins to start doing its work and filtering and cleansing and clearing. That's the body's natural daily cleansing system, the organs. And if that's not happening because the mind is awake, then there's that lethargic feeling the next day. The body gets more
Mm-hmm.
tired. And it may, the younger you are, the less you notice that immediately. I talk, like I said, my kids are like in their, you know, early 20s, mid 20s. They don't notice that. They don't, my personal children, they don't want to hear me saying anything about that's fine. There's going to come a point where they'll notice it if they continue that type of, pattern where they're not allowing that sleep time to happen at that time. And that's where we can get a liver that has not had an alcoholic experience, but has had a sleep deprived experience, will become what we call an inflamed liver, and it will look the same way as someone who may have had an alcoholic problem. There's going to be certain, patterns that are going to start showing up in that way. Um, and so sleep is critical. In fact, that's probably the first layer that I go to with somebody is if they're showing a sleep disturbance in one way or the other, whether it's excessive sleep, they can't wake up, or they can't fall asleep, they're waking up, anything like that, I'm going to go to that, because the body has to rejuvenate. No matter what they're eating, if that body isn't having a rejuvenative process, the mind isn't rejuvenating, then we have anxiety coming in, then we have depression, we have fear, we have worry, we have all of that stuff comes in and just keeps the body going into disease. And then the third pillar is relationship, and that's, it's the way you interact with yourself, it's the creative force you have, and it's the sexual energy that you have. And so if you have enough energy and vitality, then you're able to have that kind of that healthy relation, that creative aspect, whether that's the creative aspect outlet in, like you said, music and in the creative writing, the ideas that you do, or whether that's in the creative energy of how you're coming together with another human being and forming another human being. It's the same thing. And so, how are you spending that? Are you excessively spending it? Do you have enough from what you've been eating and rejuvenating sleeping to have that energy to move into the creative force of your whole life? And the answer usually is no for the people who come in contact with me. So we work with the sleep, rejuvenation. We work with what you're taking in to revitalize the body and get those body systems working, get the mind and body working together. And most likely, that energy force, that creative energy force, that relationship force in their life suddenly begins to work out. It's rare that I actually have to come in there and we have to begin doing, let's say, reproductive formulas to revitalize the reproductive system, the energy system, talking with them about how they're having their relationship with their, main life partner. Is it excessive sexual energy? Is it no sexual energy at all? What's happening there? Usually I don't have to have that conversation because it begins to work out in that way. But in some cases I do. In some cases that's important that, those are the three pillars right there. Because either you're depleting yourself, either you're not nourishing yourself, or you're completely not regenerating yourself. Those are the three things that require us to have this vital human organism functioning and being happy and creating.
Mm-hmm. You touched upon something very pressing that's happening in our society right now in terms of health. And over the last, I don't know how many decades, for example, in men, the sperm counts went super down. A lot more people are struggling to have kids than they want to, and all these issues. And it's quite interesting what you said that usually when you sort out the sleep and food and everything, that kind of makes sort out all the rest of it as well. But that's a really big issue that's going on right now, and how everything that's around us, whether it's the plastic that we touch, it's especially in the States, all the stuff you have in the water supply, where it's atrazine or some other pesticides and chemicals, and also in foods, um, glyphosates, all that. It's a huge attack on us.
It is. It's a huge attack on the human
Yeah.
organism. And if you kind of step back, I have a few clients who are in the stage of their life where they're wanting to have children.
Mm-hmm.
They're married or have a significant partner, and I say, well, I'm glad you came to me at this point, because they came to me for something else. But they say, hey, I want to have children. I said, because unhealthy egg, unhealthy sperm, unhealthy child, unhealthy human coming into this life, it really, they already have something going against them. So as soon as you're healthy, you're producing healthy eggs, male producing healthy sperm, you can come together, and that you can give that new organism a huge leg up.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's each person's responsibility. So by taking care of yourself, you're actually helping others and future generations. Especially
Yeah.
now that we know about epigenetics and all the rest of it. So what kind of
I mean, that's how we're engineered. We are engineered to reproduce to have a new generation, and that you always think the hope for that next generation is that they're better than the previous one.
yeah,
And so in order to do that, in your creative force of doing that, we're amazing. This whole structure is amazing, that we can actually create a new human being. You have to bring in, healthy energy to do that. Otherwise, you're gonna carry the same genetics, and genetics change with the disease. We have the ability to change our genetics, and they're changing with different disease manifestations we have, different mental, emotional manifestations imbalances that we're experiencing. Those are, the science is there. That's changing our genes, and that's staying within the reproductive tissues of our bodies.
yeah. So everything that we experience, it has an effect on how the genes express themselves. Because a lot of people tend to use their genetics as an excuse, for whatever illness they have. But back to our matter is, even if you have something in your genes that makes you more likely to have certain illness, whether it's cancer or something else, it does not mean that it's going to manifest itself at some point in your life. And that
Exactly.
depends on how you live your life, your mental state, what you take in, all
Absolutely.
the everything.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a disease, one that I work with commonly, is
Yeah.
celiacs, and there's a gene marker. It doesn't necessarily have to manifest. It's, did you eat the foods? Was your lifestyle create? I mean, we are constantly creating. Are we creating the environment within the body, and are we creating the environment outside of the body that allows that disease to grow, that allows that manifestation to happen? That's where it is right there. And so just because you have a gene marker doesn't mean it's going to manifest. It's, are you
Mhm.
creating the environment for it to do that?
Yeah, and with the celiac disease, you go a few decades back and you'd never heard about it really. And it's a tricky one because even sometimes I heard some anecdotal stories when someone from the States, they would go to Europe, they would have a croissant or something like that, and they were just fine. So how is that?
Yeah.
And the issue is sometimes it can be not necessarily the gluten itself. So I actually myself, after I did a podcast in 2021, we were talking about autoimmune disease, and she mentioned that you know she was a big proponent of staying gluten free. So I was like, okay, I'll just give it a go, right? And I think she mentioned at some point that it takes like really 6 months to get out of your system and where you start proper seeing the results. And for me, I couldn't see any difference whatsoever. Maybe it's better for me, but I didn't see anything. Where some people, sometimes it can be also the psychosomatic aspect of it. But the thing is, in the States, you spray wheat with glyphosate. So that can also play into this. So as usually, it's not black or white. It's somewhere gray, and it's way more complicated than people say it is.
It is. And what actually happens inside the body, the problem is in the small
Mhm.
intestine because it causes scar tissue on the cilia. And once that happens, they can no longer absorb the food. And
Right.
there's a whole absorption problem. And then they have, what common symptom is gas and bloating and severe pain.
Mhm.
And then inflammation. And that's because of that scar tissue that's developed over time from the excessive exposure. But not just that, there's a life situation that's happened that has created that environment inside and outside the body.
Mhm.
And so they really, anytime they're exposed to that type of gluten, and I do agree with you in the United States, because I have clients who are outside of the United States. I have clients who travel from inside and outside and do not experience that in certain countries in Europe,
Yeah.
even though they have the celiac.
Yeah. Exactly. It's kind of messed up with the states. I mean, all over the country, but when it comes to what the FDA approves and what doesn't, it's a lot of things that the FDA approves over there are banned in the US. And it's obviously it's not because over here it's bad for us, but in the United States it's somehow okay for people. It's obviously not that. Even because
Yeah.
I've heard that in Sweden, for example, it's it's not allowed to give cattle or any kind of other animals for that are made raised for food. It's not allowed to give them antibiotics, which is a really good thing, actually.
Yeah, you're touching on a whole
Yeah,
huge
no,
thing.
I
That's
know.
a whole big other episode.
A lot of the things we talked about, we could make an entire episode about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we already been talking for an hour, so I'll just ask you one last thing that sometimes pops up for me. And you mentioned that part of Ayurveda is also astrology. Obviously, it's not going to be the kind of
Mm.
astrology you see in newspapers, like, oh, this is going to happen to someone who's a Scorpio or something like that. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. And a bit. I mean, that's probably the one area that I'm always learning and
Hmm.
always a student and perfecting my craft and my skill. That's the area that's a little bit more newer to me, and so I might not have as much to share. But it's so the Vedic astrology, or Yotish astrology, is the Sanskrit term. It's off a different line. So let's say in Western astrology, for example, if you said your sun, everybody knows the sun sign. It might be, let's say, Gemini. It's a little bit degree change, and so it's might be the Taurus. So it would kind of just be one shift like this. What we're really looking at is the tendencies and the way in which the human being is interacting with the sun, the moon, and the planets, the 9 planets we call them. And of those 9 planets, the north node and the south node are considered planetary energies. And not even looking them as energies, but looking them, like I kind of mentioned earlier, when we look at qualities and aspects, and looking at what are the qualities. Is it a hard planet? Is it a more soft planet? Is it a more watery planet? And looking, I don't even think I've mentioned to you, looking, and in those qualities, we're looking at the elements: fire, air, earth, and water. And let's say, for example, Mars. Everybody kind of, it's a red planet. We associate it with, that active warrior type energy, that fire
Masculine.
energy. Yeah, and it's a more masculine. Where you look at Venus is the feminine, the feminine opposite. So that plays, and so it's more softer, it's watery, it's more of like a compassionate and a receiving. Where the Mars energy is more active, and none of it is good or bad. It's not like, oh, masculine bad, feminine good. It's how does it play out in each individual?
It's
Every
about the balance
individual has a
between them.
feminine and masculine. And the chi, like you were talking, I know that's part of it, that energy exchange, and how is it flowing through you and how is it manifesting. So let's looking at the astrology chart. Where was Mars and Venus when you were born? At the moment in time you were born, where were they in the in the sky. And then, astrology looks at, it's mathematical. It's the angles. It's this, it's that. It was in retrograde. All the planets go retrograde. Everybody talks about Mercury retrograde. Every single planet does retrograde. And it's like, a shadow. It kind of comes back. And then in the planetary structure, it moves forward. It kind of comes back and hangs where it is. And then it moves forward as it's, rotating in its gravity. And so looking at that and knowing, how does Mars energy, how does that active energy, that warrior type energy play out in who I am as a human being, how I'm living my life? How does the Venus energy playing out in how I'm living my life? Is there too much? Is there not enough? Is it completely absent from my chart? And so that's just a little bit of how it works. It's not just, I'm a Gemini, you're a Scorpio, and that's how we are. The reality is we are all of it. And what aspect and what season are we in? We didn't even get into the seasons, with Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and summer, autumn, winter, and spring, and how that plays out in our body. But it's interplaying with the seasons, and this is what the ancients were looking at: how the seasons change the environment of the body, the environment of the world we're living in, and how the gravitational pulls of these planets. It's all about the pull, the gravitational force. And when it came down to the 5 elements, fire, air, earth, water, and ether, how were those elemental forces, the aspects that those forces have, playing out in this body and reacting? Does that have some clarity, provide some clarity?
Yeah, definitely. It's quite interesting. Overall, even with this, we can see that because here in the West, we are so used to one specific way of thinking, which is very like lifestyle, very logical, rational. I need evidence, scientific evidence before I can believe something, right? But when you look at other civilizations, right, elsewhere on the world or in the past, it's not that they were wrong. I mean, especially throughout the later part of the 20th century, now we are finding out that a lot of the things these civilizations were telling us, they were spot on, right? Even though earlier in 20th century, before, there was all just nonsense, woo and witchcraft and all the rest of it. But we're finding out that there's a lot of truth in it. It's just the way these people saw the world and how they made sense of it was very different from how we did. Not necessarily wrong, just different way of thinking of things and conceptualizing everything.
Yeah, and people were a lot more in tune to the natural environment. I mean, we have been very, very sheltered into distancing
Yeah,
ourselves from the natural environment, and understanding that we are actually the natural environment. We are very much as much nature as a tree is, and we've lost that connection. And so we have a very skewed way of looking at our place on this planet, our place in the solar system, because of that in the last century.
yeah, that's for sure. Maybe if someone sleeps in a house, jumps in a car, goes in for 8 to 12 hours into some kind of office where just no sunlight, just blue light from artificial lighting, goes back and eat some unhealthy food. There's nothing natural about this kind of lifestyle.
Oh, I'm sorry, I gotta plug myself in before
No
we
worries.
get electronically disconnected.
Go finish the MBA.
There we go.
But even just before this podcast, a half an hour or so before that, I just went out, and as of the recording of this podcast, I'm still in northern Sweden, and small village, 3,000 people, give or take. So I just go a few meters out. There's nice rock formation. Did some breathing. It was actually quite sunny. It still is, for once. I just felt way better. Yeah, just have
Mm.
that few minutes, a
Yeah,
few rounds of Wim Hof breathing, and makes a big difference.
absolutely true. That's definitely when I'm working with someone who's not exposed to nature in any way, that'll be part of the treatment
Hmm.
plan, because there's so much healing. It naturally, I mean, I could go into it again. I mean, I'm going to look at the qualities and how much qualities that, you're out of balance in one way or the other. And just going out in nature is going to balance those.
Yeah. I even read that.
So, it's almost like a first aid. It's a first aid for the immense mental and emotional state.
Yeah, that's for sure. I even read that when you go into a forest, and over here in Sweden, it's like 96% of the entire country is just forest. The the trees themselves release certain substances into the air, which when you go there, you breathe in, plus all the pollen and everything. And it's really good for you. Even just going for a walk can, like you were saying about the hormonal balance or imbalances. Well, not sure I'd say these days. Even just going for a walk to a forest, breathing in the fresh air, it does improve in men, for example, the levels of testosterone. And there's studies for it.
Mm.
Right. It was really great talking to you. Now, before we finish, I would you ask a couple of questions. So, if there was one piece of advice you could give to people, what would it be?
Mm. Oh my goodness. You can't. There's so many things to say. I want to pick a good one that's useful and they can use. Okay, here's a simple and I think a practical one. Most people are skipping lunch. They're working through lunch. They're thinking that it's okay to skip it, or they're not paying attention. Lunch is actually the most important meal of the day, and it's the highest metabolic time for our body, and for the whole planet. And you have to make use and leverage your metabolism to change your vitality, to change your health. And so pay attention to lunch, honor that time, eat, even if it's like a half hour. If you get 15-20 minutes, try to pay attention to it. Try to pay attention to everything you're eating, how it tastes, how it smells. Enjoy it. I'm not even going to get into what it is, but enjoy that moment, and get off of your phone, get off of your media, get off of your work for even if it's 15 minutes. And eat the most nutritious, and the largest amount of the meal of the day should be at lunch. Try that, whatever you're eating, and it will change. You'll feel something different.
Cool. What do you think is the meaning of life?
The meaning of this human
Yeah.
life. Um, it's to learn. It's to create the environment within and without for connecting and um, and transforming and elevating the energy, the frequencies. It's all about you know elevating the frequency that you have within your body to elevate the frequency with that which surrounds you.
Great. And where can people find you?
Uh, well, if they're on Facebook, I know that's not your favorite platform.
I'm
That's
still there,
generally
but
where I
yeah.
do my That's generally where I do my posting. My personal profile is Christina Sirgun Powers. And I have a private Facebook for people to, see my podcasts and all kinds of things that I post every week informationally. Emailing, it's easy, support at yogaforbalance.online. And that's spelled out, yoga, FOR, balance.online.
Cool. As always, you guys can find all the links in the description below. And it was great talking to you. I'm sure people are going to learn a lot of good stuff from this podcast. Useful stuff.
Great. Great. It was wonderful being here with you, Elvis. Thank you for inviting me.
Anytime. Right. And then if you like this podcast, give it a like, share with your friends, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.